Well, for the next 20 minutes or so, we have a preeminent astrophysicist, meteorologist, Piers Corbyn. WeatherAction.com. And we appreciate him joining us. Okay, in the two segments we've got left, the short one and the longer one coming up, specifically the fraud of these scientists. I mean, you see them, you're in England, you're around them, but this has exposed fraud throughout the United Nations system where they went out and recruited, and those documents are now public for those that don't know, and created a premeditated fraud.
Yeah. Well, as a scientist, I find it utterly reprehensible, and I'm astounded by the depth of it. Just choosing data sets in New Zealand and Russia, just meddling with parameters to adjust actual measured data or losing actual measured data when they produce their so-called world forecast. I mean, as far as we're concerned, not world forecast, world data set, as far as we're concerned, the data set produced for the world by the Climate Research Unit of the University of East Anglia is rubbish, and we're never going to use it again. We're instead going to try and use satellite data and work with other scientists around the world in order to try and develop an accurate data set of what happened in the past, which would improve our long-range forecast of climate. And if anything, of course, it would make our projections of cooling into even more cooling.
What does this do?
In terms of what should be done with the scientists, I think all those involved in this fraudulent activity should be sacked. And we have to demand that governments do accountable and evidence-based science and policy making.
By accountable, their data needs to be public. I mean, that was the big red flag from the East Anglia facility, is that they wouldn't ever let anybody see their raw data. Now they've destroyed the data. They said they're going to give us cook.
Well, that's right. Yeah, some of the data was available, but they had these computer codes which they used to allow for various things, as they put it, to make it more accurate. Well, actually, of course, they were doing the opposite, which is why they didn't want to show what they were up to. And we should take our hats off to the guys who released it. However, I think it's quite likely it was actually an inside job, and they were releasing the data in the manner they had in order to try and say that it isn't accurate and can't be trusted, because if they had have released it under the Freedom of Information Act, then we would have been able to quiz these guys directly. Instead, one of them has stepped down for the time being, so he can't be asked anything. So I'm very suspicious of the whole thing, but, it is now clear that it is failed science based on fraudulent data, and this fraud has been activated around the whole world.
Well, the world's climate system, as you know, but for the audience who may not, is so incredibly complex that not even supercomputers can even begin to grasp it. That's why you can only look at past systems just to understand trends to forecast. Because, here's the Christian Science Monitor. Philippines force evacuation as volcano eruption threatens the cities. And, this thing is putting off more carbon dioxide than hundreds of cities will do in a decade. They admit that. But then, of course, this carbon dioxide and soot and the rest of it, the forecasters are saying, will not have a heating effect. It will have a cooling effect.
Yes, well, of course, they've got a few problems there, haven't they? The dust, indeed, does make a cooling effect, but there's many contradictions, and, of course, there's a lot of things going on which they don't understand or don't know about. There's a lot of undersea volcanoes doing a lot of things to the sea, for example, and the role of volcanoes maybe is little understood. But we are understanding more about the sun, and we know very clearly, as I said before, that CO2 has no net effect, and if anything, it's temperatures that drive CO2 levels.
When we got huge volcanoes, a giant sun radiating us, all these other cosmic rays coming in, forming nuclei that form clouds. Meanwhile, some tiny trace gas that's precious to plants is being listed as a chemical weapon. Piers Corbyn is a world-renowned British weather forecaster and consultant, and owner of the business Weather Action, which makes weather forecasts up to a year in advance, and has one of the most accurate track records out there. WeatherAction.com. And he's not just breaking down ClimateGate or Copenhagen. Before he leaves us at the end of this segment, he's going to give us his forecast in the next few months for extreme weather around the world and into the next year. And you can write it down and check on it later, or go to his site and subscribe to get more detailed weather forecast in your area. Long-term weather forecasting from weatheraction.com. And, of course, he did predict more than a decade ago the cooling trend, and that's now begun. But going back to Piers Corbyn, astrophysicist, meteorologist, the list goes on and on. Sir, the mindset of these people, you've been persecuted by them, demonized. Anyone else that Dr. Tim Ball got death threats? I could barely get him to be interviewed for my film, Fall of the Republic. People get persecuted. People I mean, these are very dangerous folks. Why are they doing it?
Well, their motive, you see, if they're telling lies, there must be a reason, because we know the climate thing is a fraud. Well, what we think they want to do, and it is pretty clear, is they want to create another bubble of false value using carbon trading, which is now worth hundreds of billions of pounds a year. And through this, they hope to control the world economy, hold back development of underdeveloped countries, and keep food prices high by burning food as biofuels, and
which is a death sentence. Which is a death sentence.
Well, of course, it is. It is. The result of their policies is causing starvation and food riots in a number of countries. And it's also causing, they claim they're trying to build jobs in a low-carbon economy. But in Britain, we've got an example where a steelworks in northern England, in a place called Redcar, is closing because Tata Steel, who own it, are getting a handout for reducing carbon emissions in England. And at the same time, they're getting another handout for building so-called clean steelworks in India. So they're taking $2 billion, and making 1,700 workers in Britain redundant. And lo and behold, interesting to notice that the director of the Tata Steel Energy Research Institute is Dr. Pacharai, who is also chair of the United Nations IPCC, i.e. their panel on climate change, which is promoting carbon credit schemes around.
And for those that don't recognize the name, he's the guy that looks like Osama bin Laden.
Yes, that's the one, yes.
So expanding on this, to put this in layman's terms, a group of crooks are in there using taxpayer money to move what's left of Western industry to third world areas where they control the population and have slave wages. It's all cold-blooded. It's like Al Gore's Occidental Petroleum that he controls, being one of the worst violators of the rainforest, and things that actually can be registered as some type of environmental loss, even though it can be regenerated. The point is that I've always noticed, like Maurice Strong, right, they are the biggest polluters. It's just utterly sick how they get away with this. And here's another example.